Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Councillor White, John White, and I'm the chairman this evening. On my left is my vice chairman, Councillor Heaney, and the other councillors who are members of this committee are sitting on the two sprigs of the table on each side of the room. They're the ones who will debate and ultimately vote on each of the applications that are in front of us tonight. On my immediate left and right are TDC officers, including the planning manager and the committee solicitor. This is a formal committee, and it's important that councillors can hear all of the presentations and the debate. Therefore, I would respectfully ask that you do remain quiet and don't interrupt the speakers. Now, the order of business for planning applications tonight will be slight variation on previous ones, in that the first two applications, they're the ones called A1 and A2 on your agenda, were deferred items, and therefore we have already taken public speaking on those, so there will be no public speaking there. For the remainder of applications, firstly the officer will make a presentation, and then we'll have the public speaking slot, and then any further comment from the officer. And then finally, the committee members will ask questions, debate, and finally vote on the application. I should finally add that this meeting is being recorded by the council, and it will be available on the council website in approximately 10 days' time. So, we turn to the agenda, and firstly, apologies for absence and any substitutions.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies were received from Councillors Crawford, with Councillor Davies as a substitute, and Councillor Holmes. Thank you very much.
And now to the minutes of the last meeting, the date of which was the 21st of August in the council chamber. I've had no notice of any suggested alterations. Could I take those as a true and correct record? I have a proposer and a seconder that I do. In that case, I'll duly sign those. And then we turn to a relatively new item where any members of the committee can ask the chairman. Oh, I have not. Yes, I've jumped to declarations of interest, and it's rather important that we take that. I immediately see Councillor Scott down the road, who is the ward councillor for Alresford. My vice chairman, Councillor Heaney. Your declaration.
Oh, sorry. My declaration. Sorry, I didn't know it was going to me. My declaration is that on item 4, which is the planning application land adjacent to Cliphedge Farm, Harwich Road, Little Bentley, the parish council, which I sit on, Great Bromley, has put in a comment about the application. But in fact, I left the room while they were discussing it, so didn't take part in any of the discussions.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Brown.
I shall not be speaking or taking any part in A1, A2, as I didn't go on the site visit.
Right. Councillor McWilliams.
I'm not taking part in A1 because I didn't attend the second part of the site visit, so I will not take part in discussion.
Right, thank you. I think Councillor Everett.
Thank you. I'd like to declare an interest in 18011314 in that I live relatively locally to the property. However, I do not believe that I'm predetermined on this, and so therefore will still be part of the debate.
Right. Yes.
I also will not take part in the first two because I wasn't present on the original planning committee or visit.
Thank you very much. And then finally, yes.
Application 1801131 at Connaught Avenue. I'm a personal friend of the applicant and have been so for many years. I have toyed with the determination, and I feel that at this point I need to retire during the hearing of this application. With your approval, Chair.
Right. Now, Councillor Scott, I mentioned by name, but he didn't tell me what his declaration is.
Declare an interest, Chairman, at A2, plan application 18/003674, land north of Cockaynes Lane, Alresford. I'm the ward member for Alresford, and obviously I'm just here to listen on that.
Thank you very much. And then finally, portfolio holder for planning.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm the same position as Councillor Heaney. I have been requested by Councillor Guglielmi and Councillor Coley to read out a statement on their behalf.
Right. Does that complete all the declarations? It does. Right. So now back onto item 4 on the agenda. This is the questions on notice that any committee member can make of me, and I go to Councillor Everett.
Can I take that as read?
I am happy to, if everybody accepts it. Have you all got a copy? No. Councillor Baker.
It may be that members of the public don't have a copy of the agenda, so I would suggest that it be read out and then it's on record, then on tape.
Good point, yes.
Good point. Members will be only too aware that we've been blessed with a long and hot summer this year. This has had the effect of encouraging many more tourists to our area than we have hitherto attracted. Our region predominantly relies on tourism for its main income. To have that activity disrupted by roadworks causing traffic jams for tourists only serves to discourage those same tourists from revisiting the area. Is it a concern to the Chairman that these tourists coming in increasing numbers are being put off visiting our area again because they encounter long queues on our main tourist routes, often caused by roadworks associated with increased housing development? Numerous examples are available to cite regarding this issue, including, but not limited to, the experience of Kirby Cross. There have been many traffic jams in Kirby Cross this summer created in association with one particular housing development, and this has affected anyone travelling to and from Frinton and Walton, and in one case with queues stretching back as far as Thorpe-le-Soken. Will the Chairman instruct officers to bring proposals to this committee on how to include in all planning permissions given by this local planning authority a condition that prevents roadworks on all our major tourist routes from disrupting vehicle movement during peak season? This may or may not require such works to take place at night during peak season and or restricting work to take place out of the peak season completely. Meanings of peak season, times of day and major routes will need to be defined.
Right, well, thank you very much, Councillor Everett, for raising this question. Maintaining effective transport within our district for our residents, businesses and visitors is an aspiration that I'm sure we all share. I will ask officers to talk to their colleagues at County Council about issues that can be caused by works within the highways during the peak tourism season. This is because the agreement of Essex County Council, as the Highways Authority, is needed to undertake works within the highway, whereas planning permission from this council is not required, and so the works can proceed without its approval. If the number and length of roadworks carried out at peak times can be reduced, it will be a benefit to all of us. However, the desire to keep the roads running freely will need to be balanced within the need to enable development to proceed and to avoid unduly delaying construction. In addition, we mustn't lose sight that roadworks are carried out for many reasons. This can include works by statutory undertakers to maintain or improve existing infrastructure, such as upgrading or replacing sewers, or telecommunication supplies. Other works, of course, are covered by the Public Utilities Street Works Act, and that allows utilities to work on the highway without giving any notice so that they can deal with emergencies such as electricity faults, gas or water leaks. In addition, the creation of new or improved access points to enable development to sites when we add such things as broadband. These are all add to the affecting the highways and causing hold-ups. This council does impose conditions requiring construction management plans, and that is on some developments. However, these may include control over such things as working times on site, but it cannot control off-site matters. However, I appreciate there have been a lot of problems this year, and I certainly will ask officers to contact Essex County Council to see if they can help in reducing the number, particularly on our main tourist routes in the peak tourist season.
Thank you, Chairman.
Right. In that case, I'm going to move to agenda item 5. Those of you who have got the agenda, it appears on page 13 of the agenda. It is planning application 17-02168, outline. It's land west of Low Road, Dovercourt, and this is one of those where we have visited this application at least twice and defer the decision, so we will not be taking any public speaking on it. So I'll turn to Suzanne just to get her views on the various things that we did ask officers to revisit.
Right, thank you, Chairman. I'll run through the presentation to refresh members' memory, but it was an application that was deferred in July, and the reason it was deferred was to enable officers to give consideration with regards to highways, improvement access and highway safety. So the application, as Chairman said, is land west of Low Road in Dovercourt, and it's for the erection of 300 dwellings with vehicular access from Low Road, green infrastructure provision including children's play area, footpaths, cycleway, landscaping and related infrastructure and service provision. So you have the report in front of you and any updates are shown in bold. So the site is located to the west of Low Road in this area here. It's allocated for housing in the draft local plan, but lies outside the settlement development boundary in the saved local plan. So in aerial view, this is the site, and you can see that it's an arable field, extends from Low Road over to a public footpath and track Dean's Lane, and it rises considerably from its southern end towards Oakley Road. So this application is an outline form with all matters reserved apart from access. So the only thing under consideration is the principle of development and the access points, which I'll go through in more detail. But this shows an illustrative plan, so the location of the houses is purely illustrative, and that's not for consideration. But this plan demonstrates that the site can accommodate 300 dwellings with adequate parking and garden provision and open space. And you'll see from here that you've got two distinct areas of development with an area of open space in the middle. So this shows the pedestrian and vehicle routes which are being considered as part of this application. So there's two vehicular access proposed, one to the northern part of the site in this location and one to the southern part of the site in that location. And there is also an emergency access proposed in this location here. Right, so let's go back. So since the application was deferred, further discussions taken place with Essex County Council Highways, and we've actually got a representative here to answer any detailed questions that you might have. And they advise that for the reasons set out in the report, which is paragraph 6.48, that the accesses meet the required standards and does not give it any rise to any highway safety concerns. There was a concern from members and from a number of objectors in terms of the speed along Low Road. The speed surveys show that this is a pre-existing problem, and the National Planning Practice Guidance is clear in the fact that conditions and legal agreements cannot be imposed to remedy pre-existing problems. You can only look at what issues the development itself may create. So you will see from the report that despite Highways comments, the developer would like to try and address your concerns, and you will note that the recommendation has been amended to include an issue to require further speed surveys to be carried out once a certain point of the development has reached. This will allow the issue of speed to be addressed, and if the criteria for vehicular activated signs is met, then there would be a clause that these would be imposed by the developer if necessary. In terms of the other aspects of the application, these have not changed from previously grown, so this shows the potential planting around the site, although the exact details would form part of a reserve matters application. And this shows the details in terms of the visibility, etc., of the accesses, because you are considering access this evening. So that is the southern access, and that is the emergency access point, which will be bollarded for the majority of the time, except in an emergency. And that shows the northern access junction. So again, that's in that location. Just to remind you, the site visit was a couple of months ago. This is the view along Dean's Lane, which is forms one of the boundaries of the site. And that is the view from Dean's Lane across the site, and they're the properties along Oakley Road, which are the nearest properties to the development, or adjacent to the development. And that's the view south down to Dean's Lane. And that is Low Road looking south at approximately the northern entrance position. And that is the northeast corner of the site from Low Road, and again, the relationship with adjacent properties. And that is the view looking north at the southern entrance position and looking the opposite direction. And that is the southeast corner of the site at Low Road, and one of the southern boundary of the site. And then that's looking north, and that is view from the southern boundary. And that is the view of the site, the rear properties of Oakley Road, which are adjacent to the development, and the view from the centre of the site to the northwest corner. So you'll see that the site itself has not really got any features. It's a field. Yeah, so that's a reminder of the scheme, and the recommendation is for approval as set out in the officer report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So normally we haven't got public speakers, but it was very remiss of me not to introduce Essex County Council Highways Officer Matthew Bradley, who's sitting quietly over there. And there are times when this committee would very much like the chance on certain items to approach Mr. Bradley, and tonight probably will be one of those, provided you address him, of course, through me. I would appreciate that. But welcome, Mr. Bradley, anyhow. Right, councillors, you've heard what we've asked for, and you've heard what we've managed to get out of it so far. It's over to you now. What are your views?
Councillor Everett.
Councillor Everett?
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank Mr. Bradley for being here. This is very unusual and something that I would like to encourage a bit more from Essex County Council highway officers, because there are a number of times when we've had issues that we really could have done with your advice face to face. Notwithstanding the fact that the NPPF says that we can't rectify pre-existing conditions, we can rectify conditions caused by the application itself. And the increase of traffic along that road undoubtedly would exacerbate an existing condition, accepted, but actually causes problems in itself. Hence why we as a committee had the concerns that we did that have brought us to this point. That said, I have to commend the applicant who has looked at that clear concern of this committee and, against Essex Highways advice, has actually come up with a solution that I think is perfectly acceptable to me. I'd be interested to hear other people around this table what they think in trying to deal with this issue, because I do think that the developer has now created a situation that could work going forward in terms of our concerns, and I'd like to commend them for that. I think that's all I need to say, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Other councillors? Yes, Councillor Scott. Baker, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I agree with Councillor Everett with regard to the applicants and their proposed solution. My concern is the length of time that it will take to get to 150 properties. I'd just like to know, if we have any indications how long that could take from detail, if the applicants have actually given an indication of how long that might be, because that's quite a long time for, occupation. That could be 4 or 5 years before even considering putting vehicle activated signs in, and the problem may just get worse before that happens. Thank you.
Right, I'll go to Suzanne. Would you like to answer that one, if you've got some idea?
I mean, it would be up to the applicant when it was built out, so I have no idea. I mean, in terms of the process, they are just at the first stage, so it is only an outline application. They'll have 3 years into which to submit a reserve matters, and then 2 years in which to implement development. So, yeah, it could be a long time away, but I suppose it brings us back to the point that the development should not aim to deal with pre-existing problems. So what you're looking at is when the development may have an impact, and that's likely to only have an impact once the dwellings are constructed and occupied.
Right.
I've just got something to say.
Councillor Heaney?
I was actually going to bring up that question about the VAS signs, or whatever they're called. I understand we can't deal with pre-existing problems, but having stood on that road there and seen the cars speeding up and looking at the traffic, I can't remember what these people who do it, but seeing the traffic speeds that have been recorded here. Can we go against that and ask them to put the VAS signs in, as the developer's been so helpful, really, beforehand.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. I'm Matthew Bradley from the Strategic Development Team at Essex County Council, so it's my team that looked at the planning application and made some comments on it. There's a couple of points that just to perhaps make you aware of on this. I mean, coming back on the VAS question, I think one of the things is that you'll appreciate that we get asked to put these signs in quite a lot across the county in terms of speed compliance. And we therefore have a kind of a policy of an Essex speed management strategy about when to apply those. And generally, we start to consider them when the speed of vehicles, or the 85th percentile speed of vehicles. So that's the point at which we record a speed which is relevant to this. So we discount the top 15% of vehicles, look at what the 85th percentile of vehicles is doing along that stretch of road, and use that to inform our decisions on this. Now, in the particular case at Low Road, back in 2016, this was reported to the local highways panel, and an investigation took place, a thorough investigation, and some speed surveys were put out along that route for sort of 2 weeks. And I think the speeds didn't actually unfortunately, didn't achieve that 5 miles an hour above the signed speed limit on that occasion. Coming back forward to look at the planning application, they carried out some further speed surveys, not quite in the same place, because what they were looking to achieve here was to make sure that there was adequate visibility at their access points. So this is what the developer is trying to look at. They recorded speeds at the access points. Now that did, on the southern access, the speeds were recorded as being slightly higher than the ones that Essex collected some time ago. Having said that, the length of the survey was not for the same duration that Essex would require. So there is, so obviously speeds can vary from time to time and depending on local conditions, that kind of thing. So essentially what the developer's done is prove to the Highway Authority that the actual visibility displays provided from the access are safe. So there's no question here about highway safety whatsoever. We're not concerned about that at all. We understand there's a pre-existing problem there, but we have this issue about compliance with policy. So, and our advice from our sort of network management team is that we need to stick with the policy and not just deploy signs because somebody is wishing to pay for them on a certain circumstance, because it makes it difficult in other situations across the county. And therefore there's also an issue about ongoing maintenance. What I will say that might give some degree of comfort is that the Essex speed management strategy that sets speed limits across the county is based on driver perception. So if a driver's driving along a stretch of road and they see a lot going on, they tend to slow down. If they don't see a lot going on and there's not much access or interface with the actual road itself, then they will carry out, they will go faster. And it surprises me in some respects that this actually is a 30 mile per hour speed limit, because in other cases across the county I've dealt with, we've got 40 mile per hour speed limits in here. So there is very good compliance along there in many respects. I appreciate they're going over the speed limit, but there is good compliance. So I think that on balance, and I think that once you've got the two accesses operational, and I think in this case you would need both accesses to be operational, which is why the 150 houses was chosen as a point, because you need to see what impact those additional accesses have had on the highway network. Well, are they going to make things worse or are they going to make things better? And my viewpoint is that drivers using that stretch of road will have a more built-up frontage along there. There'll be more accesses to watch out for, and I think it will probably have an effect on speed limits in any event along there. But if it shouldn't be the case, the developer has kindly offered to to take a clause in a 106 agreement that looks to carry out a survey and fund the signs if necessary. Now the alternative to this is that this is notwithstanding the fact it could still, if it was an issue for local people, it could still be reported through the local highways panel. There's nothing here that stops that from happening and following the normal procedure, but there is always the fallback position here that once a significant amount of development has occurred, we can pitch in and have a survey and see what's happening on the network. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Councillors, I was just going to say I know Mr Bradley's spot on, as you would expect, but of course I always reckon it's the top 15% that don't get measured that actually cause the accidents. Yeah. But I know that is the procedure, and there's no way of overcoming that problem.
I've just got one thing to ask you, so nobody else is coming forward.
Councillor Everett.
Thanks for that. I sit on the local highways panel, so I suppose that should be a declaration of interest, although it doesn't affect decision making in terms of this. And in sitting on the local highways panel, I know how long it takes to get a scheme from initial suggestion to fruition, and that can be 5 years. So I would say to members around here, yes, it could be done by the local highways panel, but grab the opportunity of money from a developer if you can.
Right. Any further? Oh, yes, Councillor Heaney.
This is going away from highways, actually, but we did discuss before putting an informative on along the northern boundary of this site, saying that there should be planting between the existing houses and the new houses on this site. Was that would be possible? Because to protect the amenity of the houses on the northern area of the site that are already there.
Yeah, I mean, landscaping is not for consideration as part of this application, but we can certainly advise the developers that that is what would be expected, and it'd be for consideration at detail stage if it's felt necessary.
Thank you.
Right, further points? None? In that case, if there's no further questions, do I get a proposer? Or a proposal? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Chairman, I think that the fact we've had this matter deferred twice and our concerns on both occasions have been addressed, not necessarily to 100%, but the fact that the developer is quite willing to work with the authorities, I propose that the matter be approved with the conditions that are outlined on page 15 and 16, and that the reserve matters come back to this committee.
Right, do I have a second to that, Councillor Everett? Any further points before you vote on it? No? Well, just ask for expertise. Now we've got this 100 houses or 150 houses. Do we need to put that specifically in the conditions?
It will form part of the legal agreement, so it's listed on page 15. Obviously, the legal agreement will go into more detail.
Right, thank you very much. So, councillors, you know what you're voting for now then. Those in favour of this application, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right, 7, I make that. And those against? None. And we had 1, 2 people not voting on this one.
3, I think.
Three not voting on it. So that application, outline application, is approved. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Bradley, for your attendance. I don't know whether you're going to sit in for the rest of it.
Thank you for your invitation. Right. Which you won't accept. Chap from Rose is here to see whether we put that through as part of the plan. Obviously, he's going to use it as part of his appeal against us, I suspect.
Right. We move on then to agenda item 6, and this is another one where we are revisiting. It's planning application 1800367 full, and it's land north of Cockaynes Lane, Alresford. Again, it's one where we asked our officers to have further discussions. Again to Suzanne.
Right, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to draw your attention to the update sheet, which has additional comments from Essex County Council SUDS, who removed their holding objection and suggest a number of conditions to be included in the recommendation. Further comments from Councillor Scott. And I think that covers everything on the update sheet. So this is an application at land north of Cockaynes Lane, and it's for 84 dwellings, including provision of affordable homes, access parking and landscaping and open space. So this is a full application, and so all items are under consideration. And the application was deferred from Planning Committee in August to the last Planning Committee, and it was deferred for officers to enable discussions with the applicant regarding the location of the affordable housing, the introduction of bungalows, the potential of alternative types of affordable housing, so sort of armed houses was mentioned, and the submission of additional ecology reports, in particular a report on dormice. So just to remind members and go through the application. So the site is outlined in red. It's outside of the settlement development boundary for Alresford within the adopted local plan, but it's within the emerging local plan. And there is extant planning permission following the grant of planning permission at appeal for up to 60 dwellings on the site. Therefore, there's no principal objection to the development. So that shows the site. It's relatively flat grassland. It does slope gently from east to west and is fairly well visually contained. And this is the scheme that was approved at appeal. So it was an outline scheme, but that was what was shown to the inspector in terms of the likelihood of potential development. So this is a site from junction of Cockaynes Lane. May have changed since these pictures are taken because the development going on the opposite side of Cockaynes Lane. And that shows the position of the site access to be created through the hedgerow on the... And that shows the site. So again, there's nothing of specific feature within the site. And again, that's another photo of the site. That shows the properties along Station Road to the east of the site. And that's some more properties along that Station Road. And these are the bungalows to the north of the site. And this shows the proposed layout plan. So you've got access from a Bellmouth junction off Cockaynes Lane and a number of secondary roads leading from that. The scheme would provide a range of house types, so you've got detached and semi-detached houses, and 2, 3 and 4 bedrooms. The exact mix is 13 2-bed properties, 37 3-bed and 34 4-bed. Equates the average density would be approximately 26.5, so it's considered to be acceptable given the character of the area. And the private and rear gardens would meet or exceed the standards set out within the Essex Design Guide. All dwellings are 2-storey in height, with garages being single-storey. And the parking is laid out in accordance with the council's standards. So the introduction of bungalows as requested by the Planning Committee has been considered by the applicant and agent, and the proposal has not been amended. The full reason is set out in the report, but in summary the reasons are that there's no policy basis. The agent states that there's weak demand for bungalows within Alresford, and that bungalows have been provided on land on the south of Cockaynes Lane, which is currently being developed. And in this case, they were provided due to the relationship with the neighbouring properties. So officers are still of the opinion that a scheme with no bungalows is acceptable, and the lack of the proposed bungalows would not be sufficient to justify a reason for refusal. In this scheme on the opposite side of Cockaynes Lane, there was an issue in terms of neighbour amenity, which is why bungalows was requested. In this case, there is no such relationship, and there's considered adequate distance, which is significantly in excess of the Essex Design Guide requirements. So this shows the landscape master plan, and the area of formal open space is to be transferred to the council as part of the legal agreement, together with maintenance contribution. move on to the design of the houses. There's a number of them, so I'll just flick through. But ultimately, the design takes cues from the development to the south of Cockaynes Lane, and it's fairly traditional with regard taken to the Essex vernacular in terms of appropriate detailing. Consider that the buildings are of adequate architectural quality and the house types are acceptable. In terms of the house types and the design of the affordable housing, which was an issue previously, the affordable housing would not appear any different and uses the same house types. That shows a 3D view of how the development might take, and sorry, I'll go back to the street scene so you can see how it relates within the development itself. This just shows the different types of materials. There's a mixture of different bricks and tiles throughout the site with some render and boarding, and all these materials are considered to be acceptable in that location. This shows the surface layout, so there's areas of asphalt with areas of block paving. And this shows the affordable housing. So members requested that officers discuss the location of the affordable housing and issues to do with that. So the legal agreement has been amended to still have 11 units, but 3 of these units are to be gifted to the council, which is in line with the previous appeal decision, and a further 8, which is required from the uplift of number of units, is to be transferred to a registered provider. It is proposed that, in accordance with the council's housing allocation policy, that a clause goes into the legal agreement to prioritise householders with an Alresford connection first. So there's no objection to that, and so anybody with an Alresford connection would get priority, but it would sort of phase down to people without a connection to ensure that they don't remain empty. The location of them, as you'll note, has not been amended, and this had been agreed with the council's housing department prior to the application coming towards committee. And the housing department have confirmed that for management reasons, any registered provider would want them in a cluster for maintenance purposes. And officers consider that this approach is acceptable, specifically given that they are tenure blind effectively, so there's no difference in design or amenity standards or anything like that. So it wouldn't noticeably be affordable housing within the design of the scheme. And further, the needs for almshouses was raised with our housing department, and their advice was that they do not see the need for such provision. They have a more general provision, so therefore would not require almshouses to be provided. But it's hoped that the clause with regards to allocation within the legal agreement will go some way to address members' concerns. And in terms of the ecology survey, there has been a further survey carried out which demonstrates the likely absence of dormice on the site. I think that's it. So the recommendation is for approval subject to the legal agreement and the additional conditions on the update sheet and set out in the report.
Thank you very much. Again, no speakers on this, so councillors, it's up to you now. Councillor Baker.
Can the officer just confirm, with regard to the affordable housing, and I'm glad to see that it'd be nice to be given all 11, but I know that's not going to happen. Are our allocation rights for the whole 11 or just the 3 that are gifted?
Right.
Yeah, the agreement would comply to all of the affordable housing, so even if a registered provider takes them on, they would need to comply with that clause as well.
Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm disappointed, bungalows. I think that's a shame that isn't happening, because it would have saved a lot of impact on those bungalows sitting in Station Road. I just think that's a shame. But can I just mention on the affordable housing, yes, good that Alresford residents are the ones that are taken into account first. But if one of those properties does become vacant, and it doesn't make it clear in the description here, that Alresford residents do take priority if they, and it wouldn't matter where the other person that was sitting in the affordable housing came from, whether it was outside, but it would still be Alresford residents that take priority. Can we just confirm that that would occur?
Right. My thoughts, and then we'll make sure that I line up with the officers. But the way I'm reading it, the 3 units gifted to the council, we can definitely say that top of the list will be local residents. And certainly if the remainder, is it 8, will go to a trust, then it's in the formation of the trust that can do that. They can specify it is for local people. And if it's on the almshouse style, I don't think they can have the right to buy. So they would be protected. Let's ask for whether I've got the right interpretation. Suzanne?
Yeah, so in terms of the allocation, we're not able to advise on the specific of that because that's part of the housing allocations policy. So the allocation has to be in accordance with that policy, and that is what is repeated within the legal agreement. So I can't really answer your question in terms of the need. I suppose if there's a group of people with the same need, then the Alresford residents will get priority.
Right, Councillor Baker.
Chairman, I think we've done the affordable housing to death, really. Just a quick question with regard to the public open space. It says to be transferred to the council, and I know that when we had the speakers, there was a gentleman from the parish, and I think they were quite keen to let it go to them, not district, because it would be better. So is that parish council or district, or is that yet to be determined?
That would, just confirm, that would be to the district in the first instance, because it's only the district that could be part of an agreement. But I understand that there's been ongoing discussions and that the district has the ability to pass it on to the parish.
Can I come in next?
Yes, Councillor Heaney.
I was going back to Councillor Williams' statement about lack of bungalows. I mean, there's an elderly population in Alresford, I'm pretty sure, all moved in the 1970s when a lot of that building was done in Alresford. And I'm sure that a lot of them would like to go into bungalows, freeing up family houses. So I'm very sorry that they haven't put any bungalows in. They might not have sold their bungalows on the other estate, but it doesn't mean that they won't over time. So just a comment. And going back to Almshouse Trust, you have to set up a special trust. And I don't think this is it. I think this is going to a registered social landlord, isn't it? The ones that don't go to the council. Thank you.
Well, some trusts, of course, are registered landlords or providers. Yes, Councillor Everett.
Can I ask officers, the original outline permission for the previous application for this, what did it say in terms of the general permission, whether it was for 2-storey buildings or 1/2-storey buildings? Because if the outline permission indicated that it might be 1/2-storey buildings, then I think we have a good rationale for insisting on some of the bungalows. And actually, arguably, because we're increasing the number, we still have the position where we could insist on some 1-storey buildings. So I'd like to know what the position is for that, please.
Whilst the officers are looking for that, It'll mean going back to whatever the appeal decision stated. Whilst they're still looking for that, are there any further questions? No? Right.
Sorry for that, I was just double checking before I came back to you. In terms of the outline permission, it was for 60 dwellings and again it was outline, so they didn't have details of the design, so there was no indication of what height that they would be. And the inspector didn't refer specifically to a height. And there was also in previous cases where the inspectors considered that there is a restriction on height, there's often a condition imposed, and there is no such condition. So the inspector didn't consider it on the basis of any height of dwellings.
Councillor Everett.
In which case I'd like to move that we refuse this application on the grounds that no bungalows are within the plan.
Right, do I have further speakers or a seconder at this stage? Councillor McWilliams as a seconder. I understand one of the arguments we've heard tonight was that there are bungalows on the adjacent site that apparently aren't selling, but exactly as Councillor Everett has said, they may sell. And also these properties are at least 40 metres, that's my understanding, away from the bungalows in Station Road, if I've got the right road, and it's not as if they're backing straight on to the existing properties. That's an argument one way or t'other. Yep. Solicitor wishes a word.
Yeah, I think we just need a little bit more information as to what the harm of the bungalows is. Is it an amenity harm? Is it a tenure balance harm? What policy is that offending by not having any bungalows included in the development? Because currently we've sort of dealt with lots of different issues about the bungalows, so it's really pinning down, if you want to use it as a reason for refusal, what actually the issue is, I think.
Okay, so we'll go with the amenity of residents in Station Road and design of the appropriate mix of design within the development.
Right, that gets, I can see the seconder approves that. Before I finally take the vote, and there don't seem to be any more questions, before I take the vote, ask if the officer's got anything to add at this stage.
Yes, in terms of, I think all that we can do is give officers opinion, and in terms of the amenity on Station Road, there is guidance in the, I put the wrong, right, sign up. There is guidance within the Essex Design Guide that states when you're looking at new development that there should be a back-to-back distance of 25 metres, and in this case it is significantly greater than that, which is why officers haven't requested bungalows, and it's officers' opinion that given that guidance and the excessive depth in that a reason for refusal on that would be difficult to defend.
Yes, Councillor Everett.
Okay. Not sure I wholly accept that, but nevertheless, street scene in Station Road, you'd be able to see the 2 stories behind the bungalows from the road. Yes?
Yeah, Chairman, I think then you've got to say, well, what exactly is the harm of that? The fact you can actually view the roof line, is that causing such harm that would obviously stand up as an appeal decision? I suppose that's the thing you've got to consider. I think that it is on the edge of the village. There's no doubt about that. It's an edge of village site, so we do need to be careful about how we design new developments in these locations. I think taking into account the way the site's laid out on the plan before you, I think the developer has allowed for a certain amount of landscaping, both in fact to all sides of the site to a certain extent. So there is distance created between existing development and the edge of development and the edge of the village as well. I think you've also got the large area of open space to the southern boundary there as well, which again separates it from the highway. So it's, I suppose, as you're moving past the site, whether you're walking or in a car, it would be set back from the site. I think whether it's bungalows or houses, that impact is simply not there. I think to argue that it's causing severe harm would be very difficult indeed. So I think in terms of design and layout, it would be difficult to defend a refusal on appeal for that. But I certainly understand members' disappointment that there not being bungalows on the site, but it's a difficult one to defend at appeal, in my opinion. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Heaney?
Again, there seems to be, this is a full application, there seems to be no landscaping proposed down between where the non-bungalows are and the houses in Station Road. I just think, could we put in another informative as asking them to put landscaping, tree planting, down the back of those houses if they're not going to turn them into bungalows, which... Thank you.
Councillor Everett?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the development along Station Road is primarily linear development, and this is more estate and more substantial. So therefore it's inevitable, looking from Station Road, that you are going to get a feeling of mass behind those houses that previously would not have been there. And so it changes the character of the area quite substantially in that part. And when thinking about how that's been put together by inspectors, good example is Centenary Way, where actually Centenary Way was one bias, not on the Green Gap issue, but on the effect to the area in terms of its massing, etc., of the development. I think this is an example of exactly the same thing.
Chairman, I suppose one thing to bear in mind is, there is an extent permission on this site already, and as we say, it was not controlled in terms of being 1 or 2 stories. So I think I wouldn't go as far as to say the horse is bolted. I mean, this is a higher density development, so I suppose there is an element of that you could argue, but it's very, very difficult against an extent permission already. I think that's what you'd be up against. I think if it went to appeal, quite clearly the appellants would say, well, hang on a minute, there's no control over the original approval. Why are we now imposing this on this particular scheme? It's difficult because the horse is bolted to a certain extent. That's my concern with that.
Can I come back again?
Right. Councillor Heaney?
But the thing is, they've come back with another 24 houses to squeeze into this site. They got planning permission for 60, and now they've come back to squashing even more, which does change the whole condition of the site, where the gardens would have been bigger, there would have been more open space before. Does that not have any bearing on it?
I think it does to a certain extent, and I think if members really feel that this should be, this is the way the decision should be taken and should be going for a refusal, then clearly it is a higher density development, and there would be slightly greater impact in terms of the appearance of the scheme. So there is some element to that. I would agree with that. But personally, I think it would still be difficult to fight it on appeal. But yes, clearly it's a higher density development, and therefore there is greater impact. But as I've said already, you need to take into account the way the site's laid out. I think the developer has addressed the fact that it's it's on the edge of the village, and certainly according to the landscape plan, there is planning proposed on all boundaries. So that would certainly mitigate the development to a certain extent. But if members want to go down the road of a refusal, then I think that's the way you have to go to say that the increase in density has a much greater impact, and therefore, on that basis, it should be refused. Whether you can defend it at appeal is another matter. I think it will be difficult.
Well, it would be a point for using. Anything from the committee first? Right, I'm just going to ask the solicitor what the views are, whether she thinks we've got enough points.
I would just sort of like to highlight, talking about reasons for refusal, obviously Graham's gone over the points that you've raised. The distinction between the bungalows and the houses is what was raised as a reason for deferral, as far as I can remember, but planning officers will correct me if I'm wrong. There wasn't a question over the increase in density generally. So it went back to the developer to look at how design, layout and structure of those, rather than increase in the density per se. So it comes back to the issue of, is there so much of a difference between bungalows on that line and houses on that line that increases that harm, rather than the overall increase in density? Just that you need to outline that, really, if that's what you want to go with.
Councillor Everett.
Councillor Everett.
With the greatest respect, dancing on the head of a pin, the difference between the density of a two-storey house and a one-storey house is at least 1 storey. So actually, yeah, it does create in itself a greater density. So don't quite follow your argument.
Right. Been lots of toing and froing. I have a proposal from Councillor Everett, seconded by Councillor McWilliams. And we know on the grounds of what grounds we're going to oppose it. Those in favour of opposing it? 1, 2, 3. And those against opposing it? 1, 2, 3, 4. If my count, and any abstentions? 1. Right. So on that vote, the proposal to refuse is lost. Do I have a counter proposition, please? Councillor Baker.
Chairman, I propose that the planning application be approved with with all the conditions that are on page 45 and 46 and 47, and that, yeah, and the update sheet. Thank you, Suzanne.
Right, that's proposer and seconder.
Thank you, Chairman, and I would like to second Councillor Baker's proposal.
Thank you very much. With those conditions as outlined, could I have a vote on that decision, please? Not decision, on that motion, that it be accepted with the conditions on 45, 46 and 47. Those in favour of accepting, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. And those against? 1, 2, 3. That is approved. Thank you very much. A tight one, a split vote, but there we go. It was finally approved in the end.
She would never defend that on a appeal, I don't think. I couldn't vote for it. Alexander wants to say something.
Go on. Yes. We will have a quick break for those that need to.
Yes, he doesn't
Yeah.
want to stay.
Well, you're staying. Yeah. Well.
Can we go to the loo now?
Yeah. Go on. Off you go. Yes. Right. I am reminded that the missing councillor had already said that he would sit out for this particular application as a family friend. So we move on to A3, which is a planning application number 18/01131 full, 112 Connaught Avenue, Frinton. And so it's in front of us because the applicant is a councillor and therefore it has to come to this committee. Right, Mr. Norse.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as noted, this is an application for conversion of an existing quite sizable shop from 3 units into, from one A1 unit into 3 units. And again, you'll have seen the site on your site visits this morning. So this is the location of the site itself. It's on Connaught Road, and it forms part of a larger group of, or larger retail unit, and is in effect the most southerly part of that unit will be converted into three shops. So that's the location of the site itself, just outside the main town centre area of Frinton, but obviously in a very much a mixed commercial and residential area. And that's the elevation looking towards the southeast of the site. And then just looking from the south, that's the existing side elevation. And then just the main elevation of the premises itself. So in terms of the alterations, fairly straightforward. As you can see at the moment, as I say, it's one large shop, just being split into 3 units. So in effect, you'll have one on one corner, one on the other, and then one to the southernmost area. There's a few external arrangements. There's a new door and window opening being placed in this point in place of an existing window. There's an existing door being blocked up at this point. I think this is a service area, and there'll just be some external doors placed in that elevation. As you'll have noted, you can hardly see this elevation because it's partly obscured by the other shops further to the north. So that's the existing elevations and just proposal. And as I said, there's very little change to the external appearance. Probably the key change is to the southern elevation where there's a new door and windows being put in. So, Chairman, I think fairly straightforward. Recommendation is to approve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, this is one that, should there be any public speaking, but there's nobody indicated that they wish to speak on it, in which case, councillors, straight to your good selves. This is the one we went to see, of course, this morning. And as Mr. Norse has said, externally, very little alteration from the what we saw. Conversion of one window into a door, I think, is about the only external difference.
Councillor McWilliams.
Yes, Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, very little change in the actual structure of the place as it is. I seem to remember that building from many, many years ago when I was a young person. And I can't see that there's going to be any changes as to, well, I think it'll probably come of more use actually being divided up into 3. So therefore I would like to propose that we approve. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor
Councillor Benson, sorry, yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this building has been empty for a long time, at least a couple of years. I think there have been, they have tried to get another tenant for it without success. and I think there will be much more likely to be let as 3 single units. There's going to be very little difference to the exterior, and so I would like to second Councillor McWilliams' proposal to approve.
Right.
Councillor Everett.
Councillor Everett.
Thank you. I'd like to ask officers, although this doesn't ask for a change of use, it is undoubtedly the case in the primary shopping frontage and in the secondary frontage at Frinton that it is becoming quite difficult to let out these spaces, basically because of the problem that is happening all over the whole of the country to do with retail in our high streets. So the restriction of it only being A1 rather than A1 and various others, D1, etc., may prevent the letting of these places once they have been put into fruition. Is there any way that we can relax the rule on A1 usage only to something a little bit more appropriate to the locality so that non-A1 uses could be used?
Chairman, I think in the first instance, obviously the applicant has applied for an A1 use, so that's, I suppose, the first thing we should remember. However, Councillor Everett's quite right that the actual permitted development rights have been relaxed in terms of change of use of A1, and you can actually, by submitting what's known as a prior approval application, there is the right to move to A2, which is office use, or A3, which is cafe/restaurant use. To go beyond that to takeaway use, for instance, you need a full planning application, but there is the prior approval route by which you can move to those other perhaps more suitable uses quite easily. It still gives us some control over the way it happens, but there is that mechanism. So you would need a full planning application, but that prior approval route does exist, to move from an A1 use. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Benson.
Right. Yes, Councillor Benson.
Thank you, Chairman. While I agree that A2 use might be appropriate, I don't think cafes or restaurants would be suitable in that location, bearing in mind that it's adjacent to residential home flats above that block. And there is a preponderance of restaurants, cafes, etc., along the whole length of Connaught Avenue. So while I think office space I would agree to office space and retail, I don't think that food outlets would be appropriate for that particular area.
Right. Well, so far, the proposal, we have a proposal. Councillor McWilliams, forgive me, do I have a seconder for it?
Councillor Benson.
Councillor Benson, right. With that explanation, could we vote on it? Those in favour, please, of exactly as it was requested for A1 use, please show. That is unanimous. That permission is granted. Thank you very much. And so now we move to A4, which is the planning application number 17/02014. This is a full application. Land adjacent to Cliphedge Farm, Harwich Road, Little Bentley. So turn straight to Mr. Norse, I think.
Chairman, thank you. Yes, this is for the erection of 2 office buildings, including ancillary site works, car parking, landscaping, surface water management pond, new vehicle access points off Harwich Road, and the stopping up of existing accesses. There are a few updates I'd just like to refer you to, which were missing from the main report. I'll just briefly go through those with you. In terms of relevant planning history, there was a previous scheme for a conversion of a previous agricultural building on that land, and that was, in fact, refused by the council and then dismissed on appeal back in 2008. Clearly, at the moment, we're now dealing with a greenfield site with no buildings on it. You'll note the comments made by the parish councils. We have 3 objections from the relevant parish councils. We also have additional representations that have come in since the report was published from the immediate neighbour to the site. And there's a list of the comments that have been made there. The neighbour has asked me just to clarify, on the very bottom of that list of which is additional representations, we've referred to 65 spaces being reduced to, in fact, it should say 35. Clearly, the neighbour feels that there should be a reduction in parking being proposed. And then there's additional information being put forward in terms of the ecology report that was submitted, and you'll see the conclusions there in relation to protection of protected species, including bats, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and so on. There are a number of mitigation measures being proposed, which officers consider can be acceptable. I'll just go through the main presentation. This is the site itself. As members are aware from their site visit this morning, it's a relatively isolated location, located between Little Bentley and Hare Green. There is a residential property immediately to the north of the site, known as Cliphedge Farm. And as I've noted, this is a vacant piece of land, and this gives more of an overhead view of it. The site is fairly well screened at present, and again, you'll have seen that from the site visit. There's a mature hedge to the site frontage, which will in fact be removed to facilitate the new development. But it's proposed to reinstate that as part of the landscaping scheme. There is existing landscaping to the other 3 boundaries. So that's the existing front of the site. As I've noted, there's an existing mature hedge to the site frontage. That's looking just over the hedge. As you'll have noted this morning, it's a fairly open piece of land, currently vacant and not in use, although its current use would be considered as agricultural. And that's just looking across the site itself. And there we have the proposed proposed block plan for the site. As I've noted, the actual use of the site is for office use. The development is split into 2 office blocks. One is 2.5 stories in height, which includes a mezzanine floor at the highest level. And then to the rear of that, you have a single-story building, which, and again, very similar in terms of design. As you'll have noted in the report, the applicant has revisited the scheme on a couple of occasions in terms of the layout and the relationship to the neighbours. I think the applicant has been careful to take on board what the neighbours have had, or their concerns, and has put a large amount of landscaping to the north side. A pond is proposed at this point here, and there's actually mounding being proposed within the site as well to further mitigate any noise that may arise from the development. You'll note the proposed car parking area has been placed to the southern part of the site, which again takes cars away from the neighbour to the north. And again, in terms of landscaping, it's quite substantial in terms of what's being proposed around the site boundaries. And as I've noted, to the site frontage, there would be a new hedging and tree planting to mitigate that. That's the main site access. What's also proposed is a bus stop on either side of the highway, which would feed into the existing bus services which run along Harwich Road. My understanding is at present there's an hourly bus service going to and from Colchester via this road. So in terms of the actual floor plans, this is the ground floor plan here. It's open plan in nature, as is the second floor, and then at like I said, at the top level, there's a slightly smaller mezzanine area. So that's the overall design, fairly modern, I think, in terms of its design. You're looking at a metal sheet roof coloured in dark grey, You've got full-height sheet glazing to the main frontage area, then brown brickwork to the rest of the elevations. And that just gives an example of the proposed side elevations. And that's just a perspective of what's being proposed. So I think not an unattractive building. I think it's a good contemporary design and builds in a number of interesting design features. That's just the other smaller building. Again, it's one floor only, and that's set to the rear of the site. And again, that's the elevation. So again, the same format being used. And just the 3D. So I'll just go back to the main outline. So, Chairman, as you'll note from your report, this is it is outside the settlement boundary and on an unallocated site. It's not a site that's currently allocated for employment uses. However, again, you'll have seen from your report, the applicant is keen to move his business to this locality and to the tendering area. They have looked at a number of other sites within tendering to really to find the site that would suit them best. Although there are other sites available, in terms of this particular site, and particularly its proximity to the main highway network, it's considered that this is an acceptable location. I think clearly members need to, the balance there is between allowing development outside the settlement boundary in a countryside location and the impact on obviously the neighbouring property to the north and the wider landscape. That has to be balanced against the economic benefits that would be brought to tendering with this particular scheme. So the recommendation, Chairman, is to approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now here is one that we do have speakers on. There is no speaker in favour of the application. However, we do have a member of the public speaking against the application, Mr. Mark Rogers. If you'd come forward, sir. And when you're settled and you've got your microphone live, sir, you'll have 3 minutes. If you can push the microphone button down, it should light up, which tells you that you're actually through.
Well, you saw today a site that is very flat, open, highly visible and rural. A previous appeal determined that a smaller development on it would be unacceptable because it could not be sufficiently screened by vegetation, so it would have an unacceptable impact on the character of the area. This new 10-metre glass and metal development would undoubtedly cause enormous harm to the character of the landscape. The design is so unnecessarily tall and urban in appearance. You also saw how isolated the site is. People would have to use private cars to travel to the site because the bus service is just too infrequent, and to access services since there aren't any locally. This is reinforced by the massive car park, which, by the way, seems unnecessarily large for a business that employs 20 people. Local residents would suffer noise and pollution from all these extra journeys. Plus, development would destroy agricultural land and wildlife habitat. So it is completely unsustainable, as again was determined by that previous appeal. It is not wanted or needed by the local people. 3 parish councils are completely opposed, as are 50 residents, which is a lot for such a small population. They've raised valid objections which haven't really been addressed in the report. I understand our ward councillors are in favour, but they most certainly do not represent the people of the village. Councillor Carlo Giuliani has repeatedly said his support is based on the business rates this would generate, despite this not being a material planning consideration. As you would expect from such a damaging, unsustainable proposal, there is not a single policy in either local plan that supports it. A very biased officer report pretty much ignores all this harm, precedent and policy, and has not been improved with the update sheet, despite me pointing this out. Instead, great weight has been put on the unproven and unquantified economic benefits, but the proposal is to relocate an existing business. The application form states existing employees 20, proposed employees 20. There are no new jobs. There are only vague and unsubstantiated claims of further expansion in the future. The only real justification of the proposal is the unchallenged claim that no other site is available. But the council has allocated sites for this sort of development in the local plan, and sites are immediately available at Landswood Park and Hudson Park. They have been rejected by the applicant for the flimsiest of reasons, as you would if you were trying to get approval for your own development. But these sites have not been independently assessed. Any objective analysis would show they are perfectly acceptable. So there is no need for this harmful development in order to bring in whatever benefits there might be. The local plan clearly states that town and city centres are the appropriate locations for new office development. Approval would throw this out the window and set a terrible precedent for further unsustainable development in the countryside, and particularly in the immediate vicinity. Town centre rents and business rates are expensive. Any business could avoid these by making the same spurious claim about needing a prestigious rural office to expand, and how could the council refuse? The countryside would become dotted with isolated offices in unsustainable locations, and the roads would be filled with cars. Please refuse this unsustainable, harmful, dangerous and unnecessary development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Rogers. And now, on behalf of Little Bentley Parish Council, I gather the Vice Chairman, Mr Philip Suarez. Welcome, sir. And again, you've got 3 minutes, and once you've got settled on your microphone live, that's it.
Okay, Committee and Council. Mr Chair, I speak on behalf of Little Bentley Parish Council. I would like to say we are a progressive parish council. We're keen to promote local businesses and residential development where appropriate, as can be seen by the current ongoing small-scale projects in the village. We do, however, object to the proposed development at Cliphedge Barn for the following reasons. This area is designated as agricultural land, and the development is not in the local district plan, and we've had no indication of a change of use for this plot of land. The application has attracted numerous objections, as you've heard, from residents and the various parish councils that surround this area. Cliphedge Farm is clearly the most affected premises. Well, I think the amount of objection should make it very clear to this committee the depth of the strength of feeling around this proposal. We have deep concerns as a parish council over the precedent that this development may set should it be approved. You've seen the rural, isolated countryside area that it sits in, and we just worry that if this is agreed, what's to stop other future developments in a very similar neighbourhood and area. You'll be aware, as you've been told, that a previous building was renovated on the site, and an enforcement order was made, and it was pulled down by the inspector as recommendation, Julia Gregory, back in 2009. There was numerous recommendations in her report that said that 5 employees couldn't get to the site, and there would be noise and disturbance from the site. The look and the feel of the building wouldn't be in keeping with the area. Policies at that time sought to encourage development within settlement boundaries and discourage the use of greenfield sites. So my real point in my addressing this panel today is what has changed between 2008 and 2018. Absolutely nothing that I can find or read or understand myself. The decision to approve does seem to be very much based upon an economic feeling, but this is effectively only the relocation of a business from Colchester to the tendering districts. I'm not really sure how much local business it would attract. 60 cars seems a very high number. There's mention of cycles. This is a rural site. Who is going to cycle to the middle of Little Bentley? The roads are dangerous. It is not suitable to be reached by pedal cycles. There's no mention of any electric vehicle charging, anything that would actually mitigate the pollution that this would cause. So I would really ask that this panel turn down this application. The parish council do wish the applicant every success in the future, but we do not feel that future is at Cliphedge Farm, and we would respectfully ask you to deny this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, Apparently, neither of the two ward councillors can speak tonight, but they have asked Councillor Fred Nichols to speak on their behalf as an adjacent ward councillor. Councillor Nichols.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I am making this statement on behalf of Councillors Alan Coley and Councillors Carlo Guglielmi. This is their statement. Our submission is very strongly in favour of this application, which has been in the making now for the best part of 2 years. Although this site is outside the village settlement, as outlined in the report, weight here has been attached to the economic benefit to the district. We now live in a world where local authorities have to absolutely grasp any financial opportunity with both hands. Our council, like many others, has been forced to become much more commercial in its dealings. In 2 years' time, central government will no longer financially support district and county councils. The long-standing central support grant will disappear. We will be moving to a time where the business rates will be the main source of income and the way to plan finances has completely changed. This is a great opportunity for new jobs creation in tendering to be taken very, very seriously. Although one could argue that some of these new jobs will be a relocation exercise from Colchester. This development will not only create new employment, which does not exist at present, but it will also be the catalyst for future economic growth in tendering. This will very much be our statement that says we are open for business. This, of course, does not mean that every such-like application coming forward will be agreed as a matter of course. Far be it from any of us any such intentions, but they will all be very carefully evaluated, checked for sustainability, and that they fit in with the three main roles of the NPPF: economic, social and environmental. The economic case here has been very strongly made with regards to environmental and social roles. The applicant was asked to meet with local representatives on 3 different occasions, where he brought along his architect and adjusted the scheme, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Taken into consideration concerns and comments raised from neighbours, chairmen and councillors of the 2 local parish councils. The applicant also changed architect during this process in order to end up with the most fitting and beautiful building for its location. He even met on site with the immediate neighbour, bringing along a specialist landscape professional with whom a 30-metre zone was agreed. This building will be an iconic creation to be proud of, and most certainly not a blot on the landscape. The applicant wants very much to impress future business people when they visit the site. The excellent officer's report has fully addressed all concerns submitted, and it has fully dealt with water management, highways, landscaping, sequential test and all other environmental issues raised in responses received from the consultation. We also understand that the newt issue that Councillor Everett has raised has now been resolved. Chairman, some of the local residents have demonstrated their opposition to this application. It is not very often that local ward members do not support these residents in such cases. However, on this occasion, we have both put our hand on our heart and have decided to put the benefit of this development to the greater good of our district. We therefore ask you support the officer's recommendation and approve this application. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Councillor. And now the last speaker is Mr. Neil Napthine, who is the applicant, I understand. Welcome. welcome, sir. You get 3 minutes, and once you're settled and have got the microphone live, it's in your hands.
Well, good evening, and firstly I'd like to thank the Chairman and the committee members for the opportunity to speak in support of this proposal. I am Neil Napthine, Senior Partner at Brand Art Limited. We are currently located in Severals Park in Colchester, where we supply a range of children's branded merchandise for the visitor attractions trade. Following a search for new premises over quite some time now, we've selected and purchased this site with a view to siting our main office here, moving our current office staff and providing office boardroom and product showroom facilities. We are keen to relocate to the district, and this site does tick all the boxes for us, both geographically and in terms of connections and communication links. As a number of our current staff live in West Hendring, it will mean a much shorter and more sustainable travelling distance for them. I can also reveal now that we are in the process of an acquisition of a company in our marketplace who have a similar staffing level. This business is currently sited the other side of London, and it is expected that many current office personnel will not move with the business. Therefore, we'll be looking to employ locally for the positions of account management, creative and design roles, product development, along with other roles. We'll be looking for circa 10 staff in these roles initially, as well as providing work experience opportunities and apprenticeships. As already pointed out, we have made several substantial changes to the original design, following a series of meetings with neighbours and parish council representatives, which includes the removal of a warehouse, was on the original design, which we have since purchased elsewhere in the UK, a significant reduction in the size of the office building to address the mass and scale. We have now broken the design down to 2 buildings and moved them further away from the neighbouring house to minimise any impact. And lastly, we've reduced the 2 planned access points down to 1 single entrance. We have also addressed a concern around wildlife habitat displacement following the removal of a number of trees on the new A120 roundabout site, which is in close proximity to our site. We are in communication with Essex Wildlife Trust in regard of creating an ecological area on the site of a natural pond, indigenous trees, shrub species and native hedgerows, in view of providing for birds and other wildlife affected in the large area of site that we won't be building on. Our aim is to create a first-class development to reflect the dynamic way the business is moving forward currently, and we do very much want to impress our customers with a quality environment, but also want the look and feel of a building that the district will be pleased to have within its regions. I therefore would ask respectfully whether you'd agree the officer's recommendation and approve this application. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Just ask Mr. Norse if he's got anything further to add.
No, Chairman, I think all the speakers outlined the issues quite clearly, I think. Thank you.
I'd just like to ask a question.
Councillor Heaney.
I'd just like to ask a question. If we approve this development, will it set a precedent for other building in the same area?
Chairman, again, there's the phrase I've used before at committee in terms of you have to take each site on its own merits, and I think that's probably the way we'd look at that. So the answer, it doesn't necessarily set a precedent. I think we would have to look at every single scheme that was put before us. Clearly, if there was concern that actually in terms of landscape impact or the wider impact on the locality and that particular proposal failed against that, then that would be a reason for refusal. So it doesn't necessarily set a precedent.
Can I come back?
Yes.
I don't understand why it wouldn't set a precedent. Once you've got planning for a business, what criteria are you going to use to turn down other business, which is no doubt will come forward? I'm quite sure that farmers in that area would be delighted to develop an industrial site, which I'm quite sure we would get. Even if we didn't pass it, they'd get an appeal because a precedent had already been set, and I don't see how we could get round that.
I think to a certain degree, clearly it points to the fact that some development of this nature would be acceptable in this location. But as I've said, it doesn't necessarily open the door to all manner of development within the locality. So I take your point, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we'd support all development in this location.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. You may have noticed me scribbling rapidly as the speakers all spoke. And I have some concerns. The main one is the gentleman from what the parish council raised. I actually read the appeal decision this afternoon from 2009, and one of the reasons for refusal for a building that was open with 5 employees struck out and said it wasn't sustainable on the grounds of vehicles and other. I mean, it was just against policy. Our policy that we still go by, because we don't have an up-to-date plan. We have an emerging plan, which can give some weight to, but we actually go on the policies from 2007. So I must admit, I'd like the question that the gentleman from Little Bentley Parish Council asked is, what has changed with regard to the decision made by the planning inspector in 2009 and us now in 2018 that would mean that we would be able to say yes? Because at the moment I can't see that anything has changed. Thank you.
Yeah, Chairman, I think as I alluded in my sort of presentation earlier, that we've got to be a bit careful here that, the decision taken in 2008 clearly referred to the conversion of an existing building on the site.
And it was a new building.
And it was a new building as well. So that it is slightly different to where we sit today. I think the other thing to remember is the MPPF has been introduced since that time, which is more positive in terms of rural development. So I think that's something we do need to take on board. It is quite positive in terms of improving the economic offer within rural areas. So I think I need to put that, that context in there. But yes, I think I do take members' point that this site is an isolated site, it's outside the settlement boundary. It is technically contrary to the local plan. You can't escape from that fact. Hence, it's the balance between bringing new economic development to the locality versus the local plan to a certain extent. But as I said, there is positivity within the MPPF, which does support some rural economic development. But I certainly agree there is a balance to be made here.
Councillor Everett.
Councillor Everett.
Thank you. Councillor Nichols mentioned that my objection earlier had been dealt with. Well, it was sort of. In that, Appendix E that was referred to in the ecological impact assessment did not exist, and I couldn't find the data that was said to be in Appendix E. And that's because it was in Appendix C. I'm sorry, I didn't manage to divine that. But therein lies a problem, because then perusing that assessment, we are talking about HSI, which is Habitat Suitability Index, of the likelihood of great crested newts being present in the pond to the north of the site. The HSI scores were taken by the ecologist from this site, looking through the hedge to the pond. It would have been impossible to see what we saw today on the site visit, which was the reality of the pond and everything around it. And it is particularly notable that within the assessment made by that ecologist, bearing in mind that he can't see everything, he came up with a 0.55 below average HSI score, and says that therefore, because it is a below average score, that it is not necessary to do a proper assessment on great crested newts. However, we had the advantage of being actually going and walking around the pond. So I did a reassessment, and there are a few differences. The first one is that the pond area was said to be, in the ecologist's opinion, 250 metres squared, but in fact in the report itself that same ecologist said it's actually 300 metres squared, according to what he says, that makes a difference of 0.1 on the assessment. Also, there is a big difference in terms of shade around the pond. The pond is regarded as being almost entirely shaded, 80% shaded, whereas in fact the reality that we saw, and he couldn't have seen through the hedge, is that there are actually two ponds, one higher, one lower. And the lower pond probably is 80% shaded. However, the upper pond definitely isn't, and I would argue is more like 40% shaded. That makes a big difference to the HSI score, bringing it up from 0.6 to 1. There was also, in terrestrial habitat, a difference between the original allocation, which was poor, whereas I think we could see that it was moderate because there were various shelter opportunities for foraging, but it doesn't completely surround the pond. And that is the description that would be allocated to moderate in the assessment. So to cut a long story short, the assessment that the ecologist done was not correct, but it is no reflection on his expertise because he couldn't see what we saw as a committee today. So I've done the assessment again, and it comes up with a 0.67 on the assessment, which makes it average. If it is average, that means that potentially there is a 55% likelihood that great crested newts could be in that pond. It is at that sort of level that we would require and be required to have a proper assessment for great crested newts.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Well, my thoughts on it is that the building is a very fine-looking building, I've got to agree, and would look fine in a commercial environment. But out in the countryside, I'm not so sure. I think it would dominate the area. And my thoughts would be that if we were likely to approve a plan in this area similar to this, instead of having the second story, I would rather see the bit between Office 1 and Office 2 filled single story. That way it wouldn't make it quite so dominating. It might not look so nice, but it wouldn't be quite so dominating, and I think that's probably important in the area that is proposed. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
It's me and then Anne Davis.
Councillor Heaney.
We were talking earlier about the NPPF, and just a point from the NPPF said the planning should be plan-led, and this isn't the case here because this is outside our local plan and actually draws coach and houses through our policies, as far as I understand. That's one problem. We've just granted a site up the road at Horsley Cross and also at Crown Interchange recently. We've got the one in Elmstead Market. And the NPPF says planning should take account of the local countryside and development should respond to local character and history and to reflect the local surrounding and material. This is a modern building put next to an ancient farmhouse, which I think the modern building is higher, and this is also outside the village envelope. I mean, if we go back to what the planning inspector said, she said when turning down a much smaller building for 5 employees, she said the scale and nature of the building should be appropriate to the locality and there should be no impact on the amenity in terms of appearance, noise, smell, and any other pollution. She said the government discourages the use of greenfield sites and seeks to promote sustainable development near existing towns and villages. This is all what she said. But I mean, the building proposed is in an isolated location in the countryside. It's a précis, really, of what she said. The site is well away from the nearest village. Public transport is poor. I mean, 1 bus an hour, and, you know, it's not particularly good. And still is. The development will rely on private cars. She said it would not comply with national and local sustainability objects. She said the building was substantial. Well, this is much bigger, and it's 2 buildings. She said that a much smaller single building would have an unacceptable impact on the rural character and appearance of the area. I've got every sympathy with Mr. Napthine. I understand that he wants to increase his business, but in my view, this is not a sustainable place for the development to develop it.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. Initial observations confirm the isolated location of this application. Some might say in the middle of nowhere, with only one immediate neighbour. On the photograph we saw earlier, I think there were possibly 3 other dwellings nearby. And yet, in addition to the neighbours, we have 59 letters of objection. Now, public opinion is a planning consideration. These objections have come from miles around. They're not just immediate neighbours. And although we heard that some residents have objected, there are no letters in favour, no representations in favour. And I think we should take very seriously the matter of public opinion in this particular case.
Thank you very much. Members will know I don't usually take too much debate or get involved too much in the debate, but I was forced to have a look at this appeal decision in 29th of April 2009, and I too felt that things haven't changed that much. You had policy ER7, which talks about the scale and the nature of being appropriate to the locality. Now, as far as this doesn't fit in with the locality at all. I think our ER7 still stands. It's very similar to QL11, which, again, in the old plan, and I had to look it up, talks about wherever possible, a development should be fitted in somewhere near the present urban areas. We're talking of Clacton and Harwich, not right out into this rural area. QL1 is very similar. QL2 says that development should avoid wherever possible the use of cars. Now, as far as I look at that site, it's totally dependent on use of cars. We've heard that there is an hourly bus service. I think the locals told me that it's probably one bus service in the morning and one in the afternoon and the 2 return journeys. So from what the locals tell me, it is not an hourly service. It will be totally dependent on the use of cars, which is contrary again to QL2 in the 2007 plan. So, as I say, I don't usually get involved in this, but we can't forget that appeal decision. Things haven't changed that much with the possible introduction of our new local plan. Any other speakers? Yes, Councillor McWilliams.
Yes, if I may, Chairman, I'd just like to make comments. I'd like to follow up. I agree with what you're actually saying. And just 1 or 2 points that I'm concerned about is why, when there is Horsley available, why isn't that being used? Why have this impact on this very, very rural piece of area in this area? When there's only 10 employees, why does there have to be 60 car parking spaces, which again adds to the noise pollution and noise and the pollution? Bus service, yes, if there's not an adequate bus service to get people there at the time that they want, usually these bus services don't work. I do have concerns, and I do have genuine concerns that whether this is the right way to go when there are alternatives. And with QL1 and 2 and ER7, which, like yourself, I have read up on here and they still do apply. I'm just very concerned that we're having to look at this as, well, I've said what I want to say. Thank you.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. You brought up buses. I actually looked up the timetable because I'm sad like that. There's the first one gets the little Bentley, the Bricklayers Arms, in fact, which we drove past at 9:15. And then there's an hourly bus service, then it goes to 2 hourly, and it stops about 7:15. And it doesn't go actually, I don't think, I couldn't find a bus stop anywhere near the actual development site. But having looked up the what Essex County Council have said and what the officers said, then obviously there's potentially going to be outside the site. Doesn't mean to say that the bus service is going to agree to stop there, because they do sometimes. Yep, you can have a bus stop. We're not stopping there. And I was just looking at the latest NPPF that came out in July with regard to promoting sustainable transport and limiting. I mean, paragraph 103. Actively manage patterns of growth in support of these objectives. Significant development should be focused on and it's not significant, depending on how you look at it. Locations which are or can be made sustainable through limiting the need to travel. And then it goes on about, high quality walking and cycling routes. Everybody's going to drive to that location. They're not going to get a bus if it doesn't get them to work on time, because they might have to start at 8 o'clock. So I don't think it's sustainable on the grounds of it's all going to be vehicles, and that's what was actually mentioned in the appeal decision. And I appreciate what Graham has mentioned about the fact we've had the NPPF since then, but those policies are still our policies, and it's in breach of most of them, I think. Thank you.
I've just got one small comment.
Yes, Councillor Heaney.
I don't know if this is relevant, but this was part of this site was part of the wider Oasis site that was turned down by the local planning inspector in the last local plan. I mean, it was a much bigger site than this and went all down behind Ravens Green, but the local planning inspector didn't like it in the middle of the countryside either. That was the last local plan.
Councillor Everett.
And that leads me nicely into the point that I want to make. The NPPF makes great play on the fact that we have a plan-led system. Many of the comments from councillors around this room today refer to the fact that this is all against policy. I think we are in a situation here where quite clearly the policy issues are important and should be adhered to, because after all the NPPF does really emphasise that we are plan-led. So perhaps actually if developers generally, not any particular developer, if developers wish to put this sort of application in, they need to really have thought about getting it into the local plan first, into an appropriate location, because this clearly isn't an appropriate location. So I think from our perspective, the NPPF is actually very helpful in this respect. Quite clearly says plan-led. This isn't plan-led, so I don't think it should be supported.
Thank you. I don't have any more speakers at this time. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Just one or 2 points, if I may. The first thing is when we rolled up this morning and embarked from the bus, we were encountered a large locked-up gate. There was no entrance into that gate, so I do not believe that we actually gave the visit the justification that it deserved. I had no idea what lay behind that gate, apart from in the distance there was some Lelandii which had been obviously planted in a row. We were told that there was a pond in existence on that land. Would the officer please confirm, is there an existing pond there at this moment? And may I come back?
Not to my knowledge, Chairman, no. I think it's the one on the adjoining site to the north.
Yes. The other issue that has come up very much so, is that when we arrived there, I don't know if the guys can remember this, that somebody was unpacking his shopping and parking in the road in the normal fashion, no parking restrictions, and we had quite a bit of difficulty in getting past him. So therefore, the road is a very narrow construction, and it says here, in CP1 and CP2, Sustainable Transport, carrying on from Councillor Everett, improving the transport network. I don't see how that's going to work. How are we going to be improving a network? How are we going to improve anything within transport if a small minibus cannot get down because of a parked car? How do you do that? How do buses get on? I'm sure that they experience huge delays in their movement. And the other thing is, there's nothing before us on a full application of time, or how is this going to work, and are they going to have set periods of time when they open and close, and what the impact of their working time will be with the local residents as a whole. Yes, I take your views about the way that the amount of letters have come in, but it doesn't necessarily mean in rural districts. They're not heavily housed in. My next door neighbour, when I lived in Baddow, was nearly 2 miles away from me, but we still lived in the same village, and we still shared the same problems and the same worries. I believe that this, in its present form, and I go on what the try that again, on what the planning inspector said way back in day, and I think that's very applicable to what it is today, and I think we should adhere strictly to that.
Further points? No further points. Is anybody wishing to make a proposal?
I will.
Yes, Councillor Heaney. Sorry, I thought you asked to speak. Yeah, and I've called you if you wish to use it. No.
Oh yes, sorry. I'm quite happy to propose refusal. And Councillor Davis.
Councillor Davis. And that would be seconded. Right. Now, of course, I don't need to remind you, but if we were to go against the officer's recommendation, then we need to be sure of the facts that we are going against the proposal, and if you like, using the appeal decisions, then I think that would be a good start. Councillor Baker.
I think, if I recall rightly, and you have I think you and both Councillor Williams have the actual judgment, there was mention of the impact on the next door neighbour as well, including that judgment. So I think that should be included. The fact that it's an unsustainable site, whichever policy that goes against. And there was one other you mentioned, which I cannot recall now.
The one, can I speak?
Yes, please.
The building is an isolated location in the open countryside. This could set a precedent for further planning in this area. I don't know if that's a good idea or not. It's not plan-led. It's not in our local plan. The scale and nature of the building is not appropriate to the locality, and will impact on the amenity in terms of appearance and the noise from the cars on the neighbour. Greenfield site, which I probably said already, should be near existing towns and villages. So this is just me going through what the inspector said last time. Site well away from the nearest village, transport's poor, relying on private cars, would not comply with national and local sustainability objects. What can I? Richard's asking something.
Yeah. Whilst you're just talking, the transport one is QL2,
yes.
Which says the new development proposals shall be located and designed to avoid reliance on the use of private car.
Yes, and the inspector also said the building, which was much smaller, on one building, was substantial, and this is much bigger, and she said that the building was unacceptable because of the impact on the rural character and appearance of the area. And none of these things had changed. Basically, you could turn it down and what the appeal decision...
Councillor Everett.
Oh, sorry, it's me.
Can I offer a short version of that, which is that it's unsustainable on social and ecological elements, and these are not outweighed by the benefit of the financial, because that was actually made by the councillors, and we need to put that in there to say these things outweigh the potential benefit of the financial situation.
Can I just ask something? I mean,
yes.
Do you agree, Councillor Davis, with that? Which I do agree with. Yes, I do. Because we have to sort of set the parameters of what this is, because we've seconded and moved it. We've moved it.
Councillor Baker.
Chairman, Councillor McWilliams has kindly lent me her, whatever it's called. ER7, I think you mentioned the policy ER7. Noise and disturbance, iPad, thank you. Yes. To the occupiers of that residential property, it's otherwise very quiet location. And the inspector actually said, I consider that the type and scale of the activity I've described in the application, bear in mind it was a lot smaller than this application, and as could take place even if change of use were not permitted, would not be compatible with the rural and domestic surroundings. So I think that should be included as well if we are minded to go with refusal.
Can I say something else?
Yeah. Yes.
Also, something about the design. It said something in the NPBF about designing for the locality, and this is a modern building stuck next to an ancient farmhouse. In fact, one of the oldest buildings in the village.
Right. Now, those are the points. Before I finally take the vote, I'm going to ask Mr. North if he's got anything he wishes to add or challenge.
Chairman, I think it's clearly well debated by members, and I've almost run out of space to write down the number of reasons you want to refuse it. So there are very good reasons for refusal there, which can be, which are defendable. So I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Right. Then we have a proposer, Councillor Heaney, and a seconder. Those in favour of refusing with all of those points added together. Those please show. That is unanimous in that case. Thank you, councillors.
It's a bit of a marathon.
Now, that I think brings us end of the agenda. So thank you all very much. There is just a reminder to councillors that the training session which appeared in your diary, which was replaced by an earlier training session, so there is no training session on, from memory, the 25th, I think, which appears in the diary. Just as a reminder.
Isn't there some briefing on Wednesday about something, or the local plan or something? When's that?